Okay, so we've learnt all about highlighting our model, but what is glazing? Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, another back to basics video for you, and in this one I want to have a look at glazes and glazing. So, as always, this video is aimed for beginners. I really hope that it's useful to you, and yeah, let's have a look at glazing. Okay, so let's have a look at glazing. So first of all, as always, I'm going to have a chat about glazing, and then I'm going to demonstrate some glazing for you as well on the camera. I've mentioned obviously that glazing is a very advanced technique, and the reason why it's advanced really is because you've basically got to put in a lot of time to glaze a model. Now, what is a glaze? A glaze is basically paint which has been watered down or thinned down to quite an extent that when you put it onto your model, hardly any pigment, hardly any paint is actually going to show. And it's a build-up of this pigment, this paint, in layers, which is how we build up our paints. And what this in turn gives you is a nice transition from one colour to another, because you're putting on such thin layers, and of course this takes time. Now usually this is only done for show pieces or competition pieces. So if you're painting 10 Space Marines, a tactical squad, you wouldn't normally be glazing your miniatures. Now I'm going to demonstrate this in a minute, but first of all I want to have a chat about what other uses glazing has, because although it is quite an advanced technique, doesn't mean that it's a technique not worth knowing. Now, I hardly use glazing, to be fair, but occasionally I will, and I won't necessarily use it for what I'm going to demonstrate to you in a minute. So what else is a glaze really useful for? Well, I'm going to bring in another model for you, so let's bring in, if I can, my Warp Spider X-Art. Now, I'm particularly looking at his red armour. Now, I wanted his red armour to have a bit more of a pop to it in terms of its highlight. So I didn't want to highlight it with the usual red and then sort of going up to like an orange highlight. I wanted to have quite a stark highlight. So I went in with bleach bone. I didn't go in with pure white. It's not very often you will highlight with pure white. But I went in with a bleached bone colour. Now, because the bleached bone is obviously very stark, I didn't want it to sort of pop too much as such, because it would just look a little bit odd. So what I did is I went in with a little red glaze. I made a glaze up at the base coat colour, and I just went over the whole of that red, all over the highlights, with this little glaze. And in turn what that did is it toned down those little highlights, made them a little bit redder, matched into the sort of base coat a little bit more, but still giving me the pop factor of those really light highlights. Just spin this around so you can see the back of him. Hopefully he's picking up on the camera on his legs. So that is one reason for a glaze. One good sort of extra option for a glaze is to basically tone down highlights. Now the other example that I'm going to show you what I used a glaze for, now this is a little bit different, but on this one here, my Space Wolf, I did his power weapon effects, and then I went over and I glazed the power weapon effects with a white glaze that I made up. So that's white paints, with loads of water. Again, I'm going to show you the consistency that you need to do a glaze in a second. And the reason why I did that is I wanted to have like a frost feel to my weapons. I did it on his power claw as well. So I did all the weapon effects, and then I went over with a white glaze, and it brought all of the little highlights together and also gave me this sort of frosty look. So you don't necessarily have to do full-blown glazing to actually highlight your model. Glazing does have some other applications, and that's why I want to talk about and show you glazing in this video. Okay, so that's other uses for glazing. So now let's have a look actually highlighting with glazes. In actual fact, in this particular video, rather than doing highlighting, I'm actually going to do some shadow work with a glaze, which I thought A, would show you some shadowing, and B, obviously show you some glazing. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to add some shadows using a glaze to the shoulder pad, which in the previous video we did some wet blending highlights to. So I'm going to take those highlights to the next step as such. So the shoulder pads that I'm doing are red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shadow that red with the opposite colour on the colour chart, and that's going to be green. So it's always a good idea if you are doing shadows to use the opposite colour on the colour wheel. It's a good starting point. Of course you can change that around and have different effects, but it's a good starting place. So I'm going to use this here, the Caliban green, to put some shadows onto my red shoulder pads. So first of all, let's just mix up the paint. Now I'm going to use a very small amount of green because I'm only doing a small area, so I'm just going to put some green onto my wet palette, a little bit more I think, like so. And now I'm going to get some water and I'm going to add some water to this mixture. Now there's a little test that you can do to find out if your glaze is the right consistency. So first of all, just rinse the brush off and dry it. I'm going to take some of that green and I'm going to bring in a paper towel, a kitchen paper, and then I'm going to take some of that paint or glaze on my brush. I'm going to put that down on the paper towel. Now as you can see, that just exploded and spread out, so it shows me that I've got the right consistency. If you put it, let's just try this colour here, I've got some yellow on the palette. If I put this down and it doesn't spread out, it's obviously not the right consistency. So this is what you're looking for to know that you've got the right consistency for a glaze. Okay, so now we've got our glaze, let's bring in our model. Right, so here we go. This is our little Space Marine. So you can see the previous blending that we did with the highlights just in the corner here. So now we're going to add some shadow to this model. Now, unlike when we did the feathering, where you would feather from the highest point, the lightest highlight, and then basically feather it into the lowlights, when you're doing glazing, it's actually the opposite. So you basically start in the highlighted area and you glaze into the darker area. Now the reason you do that is because the glaze is so thin, the pigment isn't there that much, that you almost need to push that pigment to the area that you want it to be, rather than when we were feathering, we were spreading the pigment out until there was no pigment left. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to go to the bottom of his shoulder pad. Let's do this one here. Hopefully I can get this on the camera for you so you can see it properly. Okay, so I'm going to take some of this glaze, and like I said, I want the shadow to be at the bottom here, so rather than going to the bottom and spreading it up, I'm going to get some glaze on my paint brush, and then I'm going to go up the top here and I'm going to pull that paint down. Now like I said with the glazing, it's very, very thin coats, so it's going to take several coats before you actually see too much effect. Now let's do the other little area here, like so. We're going to let that dry, and whilst that's drying I'm going to do the other side. Okay, so this area is dry, so now I'm going to go in. I'm just going to pull paint down into the corner. What I'm getting here is a nice little transition. It's gradually building up this little shadow that I'm after. And this is why I was talking about it being a top end technique. It's not necessarily because it's difficult to do, it's just because it takes a long time to do because you're doing many thin coats. So you can start to see now I'm getting, well, hopefully you can see it on the camera, I'm starting to get a shadow just on that area there. So I'm going to keep working on that and I'll speed the camera up a little for you. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So we've got some nice shading just in there. I'm just going to take that to the next level and I'm going to do a little glaze of some brown. So again, I'm going to make my glaze up. I'm only doing a tiny little bit, so just a little bit of brown here and some water. Like so. And then we're going to do the towel test. I need a little bit more water, it's not quite spread out enough there. There you go. Okay, let's get the man back in. So basically just add this little brown just to give it a little bit more of a transition into this darker shadow, just right on the edge here. Now you don't want to do too much, bearing in mind that the more coats you do, obviously the darker it's going to get. In particular in this case, because of course I'm doing shadows and not highlights, but highlighting would be exactly the same sort of technique. And just on the front here, I'm just doing this bit here. There you go. I would suggest one more little layer of that brown. Okay, done. We've now shadowed our shoulder pad. So we've got a nice shadow going all the way round to those highlights that we did on the wet blending stage. So that is it for this video. I really hope that it was useful. Thanks as always for watching. Thanks for all the comments on the video. Really appreciate all of the support, and I look forward to making the next episode in the series, and we are going to have a look at metallics. Thanks for watching.